Welcome to the Emisarios Unidos de Luz channel. If you enjoy this near-death experience story, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Now let's start with the story. My story begins when I visited a psychic friend, a friend who also happens to be a Christian. My friend, a God-revering woman, studies scripture and prays to our Lord daily, yet she has the ability to intuit things. "You have lung cancer, and you're going to die," she informed me on that occasion. From previous readings she had done for me, I knew her declarations to be remarkably accurate, so I had no reason to doubt her assertion. The following day, I reported to the Veterans Affairs Medical Center and requested an examination of my lungs. "Have you ever had a lung cancer screening to test for Agent Orange exposure?" the physician asked. When I replied that I hadn't, she scheduled a CT scan. The scan confirmed that I did indeed have lung cancer. When physicians performed further exploratory testing, they advised me that the cancer was at stage 3B, a stage deemed incurable and untreatable. "It would be wise to get your affairs in order because you don't have much time left," they warned. Refusing to accept the dire prognosis, I boarded a plane to see another physician for a second opinion. The physicians told me that the doctors had lied to me about the stage of my cancer. The cancer is actually at stage 3A. They lied because the National Cancer Institute advises that a stage 3A cancer patient may be eligible for surgery, whereas a stage 3B patient is not, the doctor explained. The physicians advised me, however, that the long-term prognosis remained the same, that it was a terminal illness and that I was eventually going to die. A friend, who happened to be a social worker, called and told me that he had been in touch with a clinical oncologist who was willing to see me despite the fact that I didn't have medical insurance. Those oncologists found a lung cancer treatment that was being trialed, a trial I was eligible to participate in. They invited me to take part, advising me that the costs would be covered under the government's medical assistance program. The treatment worked remarkably, inasmuch as it eliminated all but the 5.5 centimeter malignant tumor that had been growing in my left lung. While the treatment didn't completely eliminate the cancer, it reduced it enough for surgeons to proceed with an operation to remove the remainder. I was healing well after the procedure, which involved the complete removal of my left lung. However, a month later, the doctors informed me that I had developed a fistula and required another operation. It was during that second operation that my incredible, albeit miraculous, NDE story began. After the surgery, I opened my eyes to find the entire surgical team gathered in a huddle on the far side of the operating room. As I listened, I realized they were praying for me. Suddenly, one of the team members turned, locking eyes with me, and noticed that I was wide awake. "He's alive," he shouted, prompting the rest of the team to rush to my side. Checking my vitals, they expressed their overwhelming relief, exclaiming how astonished they were to see me alive. They hadn't been able to revive me when my heart had stopped during the operation. Convinced there was no bringing me back, they had turned to prayer for my soul. After confirming my vitals, they resumed their duties, but one physician remained by my bedside. "You're probably wondering why I'm still standing here," he said. "Because you want to tell me something more about what happened," I replied. "I've been performing these same surgical procedures for the past 20-something years, and what happened here today is something I've never experienced before. It has had such a profound effect on me that I feel I have to tell you about it," he said. "Tell me what happened," I replied. "We had you wide open and were removing fat tissue from your heart, which we planned to use to tie up your fistula, when all of a sudden, you started talking out loud. We were so startled that we all jumped back from the table, thinking the anesthesia might have worn off prematurely. We immediately checked our instruments, and after confirming that you were still under, we just stood there and listened as you spoke," he said. "What did I say?" I asked. "It's not so much what you said but rather whom you were talking to," he replied. "Whom was I talking to?" I asked. "You were talking to Jesus Christ," he said. I wondered if the doctor was joking, but when I took in the seriousness of his expression and how he still seemed to be in shock, I knew he was speaking sincerely. "Did it seem as though he was responding to me?" I asked. "We couldn't hear any other voices, but it sounded like you were engaged in a two-way conversation," he said. I was discharged from the hospital 10 days after the operation and soon all but forgot about the surgery and the account the doctor had given me. About a month later, however, I went to visit my psychic friend. The moment she saw me, she froze, staring at me in complete astonishment. "You have light radiating from you and angels flying around your head," she said, her gaze fixed on the spectacle only she could see. Then, in a subdued tone, tears welling in her eyes, she added, "You know that you died last month on the operating table, don't you?" "Yes, her doctors said as much," I replied. "I've been performing psychic readings for people for the past 40 years, and you're the only person I've ever read who has had a personal encounter with Jesus Christ," she said. "Did the medical staff tell you what they observed?" she asked. "Yes, but they weren't able to tell me much, only that I was having a conversation with Jesus." "Are you able to provide any details?" I asked. "Yes, I can recount the entire conversation," she replied. "What did Jesus say?" I asked expectantly. "I'm going to tell you what he said, but first, I need to tell you something. When you last came to see me, I told you that you had cancer and that you were going to die. That was it for you. You were destined to pass soon after, and according to the energy I received during that reading, you shouldn't be here right now. When you died and left your body in the operating theater, you screamed at the top of your voice that you were sorry if you had ever hurt anyone in any way while you were on earth. You cried out so loudly and with such emotion and conviction that you startled everyone around you at the time. Jesus happened to be there, and he came over to see what all the commotion was about. Without knowing who he was, you jumped in front of him and immediately began telling him that you had just gotten out of prison, that you were undergoing treatment for cancer, that you were receiving a government pension for having been exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, that you weren't ready to die yet, and that you wanted to go back and have some fun. When the staff in the operating theater heard you say that, they began to laugh. At that moment, Jesus touched you, instantly healing you and sending you back to your body. You are now going to live for another 26 years, during which time you will help others who have had similar experiences to yours, because the deepest desire of your heart is to help others," she said. "You will share your story with many, though few will believe you," she added. That incident took place in the year 2000. Since then, the cancer that remained in my body metastasized to my neck in 2003, elevating my condition to stage 4 lung cancer. Once again, I sought medical treatment, but the doctors refused to operate, insisting there was no chance surgery would cure me. Faced with the prospect of dying once again, I turned to the physicians who had helped me receive treatment and undergo surgery the first time, and once more, they came to my aid. After the operation to remove the remaining cancer, my surgeon informed me that he had been unable to remove it all, that some cancer still remained. Remembering what my psychic friend had told me about living for another 26 years, I smiled and thanked him for all his help. A few months later, a follow-up CT scan was performed, revealing that, for the first time, I was cancer-free. It is now 5 years later, and I am still alive and well. I thank the Lord every day for another day of life. In 2005, I returned to school and obtained a master's degree in social work, hoping to be of service to others. While the story I've shared isn't the only instance in which the divine has influenced my life, it is undoubtedly the most dramatic. Every day, I share my experience with Jesus and how he cured me of cancer with someone new. I especially like telling my story to cancer patients, as it seems to impart a sense of hope and faith to those facing death. I like to think that my story provides solace and comfort to those who are told by doctors, "You have cancer. There isn't anything anybody can do about it, and you don't have much time left." Now I will recount my second supernatural experience. In May of 2007, I was rushed to the hospital after suffering a heart attack. As I lay in bed, receiving assistance from a BiPAP machine, I was reading a book titled A Search for God when I decided to pray. As I closed my eyes, I noticed a small pinpoint of light and chose to focus on it as I prayed. As I began to recite the Lord's Prayer, the light grew larger, and as it expanded, it became so bright that it felt as though my entire head was filled with light. It shone so intensely that I could no longer bear to look at it, so I opened my eyes. When I did, I found myself so out of breath that it felt as though I had just gone for a run. In a state of awe and exhilaration, I excitedly began explaining to the nurse, who had suddenly appeared in the room, what had just happened. He then noticed that my BiPAP mask had come off and that I was lying beside my bed rather than in it. "How long has it been since you had the mask on?" he asked. "Never mind the mask, you've got to hear about that light," I replied. "I will listen to your story about the light later, but I need to know how long it has been since you last used the mask," he said. "Well, I'm not really sure," I replied. The nurse then called the other medical staff to the room. No one could determine how long I had been without the mask, but they noticed that all my vitals were within the normal range. I was breathing normally and getting sufficient oxygen, proving that I no longer needed the breathing machine. During that experience, I felt as if I had been in the presence of God and had once again been instantly healed from a dire condition. I was in such bad shape when I arrived at the ward that some of the nurses had been certain I was about to die. While I don't think that experience qualifies as an NDE, I was certainly close to death. Before being discharged, however, I was taken into surgery and given a heart stent. The doctors explained that one of my arteries had been blocked, which had caused my heart attack. Through these experiences, my life has been utterly enlightened by Jesus, by God, the source of divine light.